Welcome to my round 6 recap from Vegas. This was a super long game. I finished like 20 minutes ago. It's currently 3:46 p.m. and the next round starts at 5. So I'm going to try and speedrun this recap. Now the game, spoiler alert, the game was 85 moves. I think this was my longest game in terms of moves and duration. So my opponent played e4. I was playing FM Austin Mei, who is, I believe, 18, maybe 19 years old, up and coming player. And I prepared for him before the game. And originally I was going to play Sicilian, but I saw his repertoire against e4, e5, and I saw he plays a lot of Evans Gambit. So before the round, I was preparing basically how to try and refute the Evans Gambit. Now, I knew it wasn't a guarantee that he would go into it, but just to show if bishop c4, bishop c5, b4, I was prepping this a lot. So unfortunately, we did not enter the Evans Gambit. Would have been a fun opening to have, but instead he played the Spanish, which is a bit more mainstream, probably a better choice, given that, yeah, it's just a more reliable opening. And it's not something I prepared so much before the game, because I only found like a couple games he's played this before. So I went for the main line, a6, bishop a4, f6, castle, bishop e7, and I was playing a martial move order. So if rook e1, castle c3, I would have the option of going into the martial, or wait, no, after rook e1, b5 first, bishop b3, castle c3, this position I would have the option of going for martial, or maybe more kind of traditional line. But instead of rook e1, he played pawn to d3. And I'll admit that I was basically out of any specific prep after d3. Yeah, it's been a while since I studied the Spanish from the Lac side very seriously. I was trying to remember the nuances in the Nepo Ding match because they went into a lot of Spanishes, but I was pretty much on my own. But I knew the idea that d3 defends the pawn, so white is threatening to take and then take on e5. So for that reason, I play pawn d6 and then c3. And the next several moves were all pretty natural. It's developing bishop c2, rook e8, a4. And this was maybe the first decision that I have to make, is what to do with a threat of a takes b5. And basically there's three options I was considering between rook b8, bishop b7, and b4. And ultimately I chose to play b4. I thought this is a nice way to maybe try and change the structure on the queen side. And then he plays a5. And this is a typical positional idea to fix the pawn on a6, so I can't play a5 myself. Also setting up maybe potential ideas of bishop a4. But the game continues. Rook b8, knight d2, bishop f8, knight c4. And basically my plan here was to get a setup with g6, bishop g7, put the bishop on d7, and then later go for this knight h5 and f5 idea. And we're going to see the next several moves play out exactly according to my plan. I start with bishop d7, bishop d2, g6, h3, bishop g7. And it just seemed like white wasn't really doing much of anything productive. Like the bishop came to a4, but I was just carrying through with all the moves I wanted to play. After bishop g5, this did perhaps misplace my queen, but I thought the queen is useful on c8, creating the battery, and there's also ideas of maybe queen b7 to exert more pressure on the queen side. So queen d2 was played, and in this position, I took a long think, because I was trying to figure out the best approach to make progress on the king side. And this is where I pause to have some water. Important to stay hydrated. So after a long think, I decided to play f6, even though Ben Feingold says never play f6. And the idea is to chase the bishop back to e3, where it's arguably a little bit misplaced. Like, even though it's centralized, it takes away the square from the knight, and then I play f5, threatening to trap the bishop with f4. So I was feeling like momentum was in my favor, but it's still a really complex position. And I will say I haven't checked this with the engine, so I really don't know what the true evaluation is. I don't know where the mistakes or blunders were made, if any, but the position's definitely getting exciting. So my opponent took very quickly, actually, which surprised me because after takes, I have the option of course, taking back. But when I played f5, I was initially calculating that I can play d5 here. And I spent a long time trying to decide between pawn takes pawn and d5. And this would essentially trap the knight, but it's not so simple. And my opponent was telling me after the game that he was considering either f takes g6, which I didn't even see as an option, but also g4. And then it just gets really messy after takes. I spent a long time trying to calculate this position and just so much pawn tension on both sides of the board. And ultimately, I decided to not go for d5, but just to recapture. And this keeps a little bit more control because now I'm still threatening to play f4, and there's still ideas of d5. So white does have to be very careful. And he went for a very concrete line, which is maybe the only playable line, is bishop h6. I play f4, cutting off the relationship between the queen and the bishop. And after bishop g7, king g7, he plays pawn to d4. And this is where the whole position just kind of explodes because white's trying to just destroy my amazing pawn chain. And the following line is relatively forcing, like it's very concrete. And I was just kind of going with the flow the next few moves. I play pawn e4. He plays pawn d5, counterattacking my knight. I take on f3. He takes on c6. And then in this position, originally I was going to play bishop f5, but then I realized I can take on h3. And the point is queen g4 is a massive threat. So white has to be like really, really careful here. And I thought maybe I'm on the verge of winning because if he takes on e8, I think I can just go right in with queen g4. Yeah, this looks very strong. I mean, there's rook e7 check and then maybe g3, but it seemed way more fun for black. But this didn't happen because after I took on h3, he found a move to essentially consolidate a nice centralizing move, queen d5, hitting the knight and hitting the pawn. And I have nothing better than to go for queen g4, of course threatening mate in 1. And then after he takes on f3, we trade queens. And just over the last few moves, the position has transformed drastically. Like it went from a very sharp, double-edged middle game position with tons of tension to now we've basically liquidated into some kind of endgame with a very weird pawn structure, just pawns scattered everywhere. White's king is a little bit weak. And I was feeling pretty good here. Now, I took a bit of time because originally I wanted to play the move bishop e6 and stop the rook trade and then eventually like king f6 and get the rook to the g file. But then I realized if I play bishop e6, there's knight takes d6. And I think this is big trouble for black because after takes there's c7 and then my rook, actually both rooks and my bishop are all being attacked in various ways. So I didn't want to blunder into this. So instead of bishop e6, I played rook e6, which doesn't allow this tactic, and it aims to lift the rook and essentially provokes a trade. After takes, I get tempo on the knight. He plays knight d2. And in this position, my opponent told me after the game that I had a different option than what I played. The move I played was knight f6, but he was saying that I can, I think, move the king and go for rook g8, which maybe was an interesting alternative. Again, I haven't had much time to analyze, but I played knight f6 with just the idea that the knight should really return to the center because it wasn't doing too much on the edge. And I thought that maybe eventually it can maneuver and attack the pawn or just pressure the queen side. But then he played c4. My opponent actually told me that I should take first to maybe prevent white from playing c4, which maybe I should have more seriously considered. But I did give white the chance to play c4, and he played it. And I thought it's still fine because now the pawn can be a target, But very soon, we're going to see how this pawn becomes useful for white. So after king f7, king h2, bishop f5, some improving moves, the game proceeds to get really sharp. I play bishop d3, trying to go after this pawn, but also setting up bishop to e2. And after c5, takes, I play bishop e2. And again, we're in some very tricky kind of tactical line where the f3 pawn is hanging, and it's not so easy for white to defend because king g2 runs into rook g8. But white is able to get counterplay after what happened, bishop b3 check, king g6, and then rook g1 check. And I think I maybe underestimated the danger in this line because I had calculated the fact that my king will come to h6 and that the f-pawn is still attacked. And if I can take the f-pawn, then there's ideas of rook b5 to swing over to h5. But when he played this next move, I realized that it's very, very scary for black. And I actually completely missed the fact that he has the next move, which I think is the strongest move in the position. So if you want to try and find white's next move, feel free to pause the video. And the move he played is knight to d7. And this was just a blind spot for me. I didn't realize that this is like a very forcing option in the position. And I can't just defend my knight because the knight also controls f8. So basically we're in a situation, or I'm in a situation where I have to trade, and now white has a very dangerous passed pawn on d7. And I have to be very careful of ideas of rook to g8 and then just eventually queening for white. Now, in this position, I played the move rook d8, but for a moment I thought I had a brilliant line, which unfortunately doesn't work. I really wanted to play the move bishop takes f3, with the idea that after rook g8, I would have the move rook to b5. And this line almost works. Black is threatening mate in 2, so if white queens, check and mate on h1. The reason why I didn't go for this is because of bishop e6. If not for bishop e6, I think maybe it's okay for black. But bishop e6 aims to play bishop h3, and now I can't stop the pawn. So I want to check this with the engine. Is bishop e6... Oh, there's multiple winning moves for white. Bishop e6, bishop f7, even king g1 is winning. King g1, rook h5, and then king f1. Okay, so yeah, it was just a fantasy that this line could work for black. So I played the move rook d8 to blockade the pawn. He plays bishop e6. And now the game just revolves around this d7 pawn. I really want to try and win it, but he has a very strong move here, rook c1. And if I take the pawn, he's not going to trade. He's going to just pin my bishop. And I would be losing material here. So the pawn's not capturable. And now my c7 pawn is hanging. So my only move is to play pawn c6. And then he moves back to g1. So now he's threatening rook g8 because my bishop no longer hits d7. So I play pawn c5, unleashing the bishop. And then he moves back to c1. And now my c-pawn is a target. And I still can't take on d7 with the bishop. So I play c4. I'm still kind of just going with the flow. Like a lot of my moves are only moves here. But then the position liquidates because he takes on c4. I take on d7. He takes on b5. I take. And after rook c6 check, I'm beginning to realize that this endgame is very, very difficult to hold because white has the more active rook and the more dangerous passed pawn. On top of that, my pawns are all potentially weak. Now, white's pawns are maybe potentially weak as well, but white has initiative here, so that does not bode well in black's favor. But I tried to fight king g5, rook c5, and then king h4, trying to activate the king. He plays rook f5, which I think is a very accurate move, not taking on b5. If he takes on b5, I would win back the pawn, and I really just want to trade as many pawns as possible to try and have drawing chances. But after rook f5, he wants to take on f4 with check. So I play rook a7, trying to get rid of this pawn, but then he takes on b5, so defending and going after my b4 pawn. And at this point, I'm realizing I'm in like serious, serious trouble. And yeah, with accurate play, white should be able to win, but I still had a few tricks up my sleeve. I played the move pawn h5. And at this point, I am dreaming of a scenario where, let's say white plays b3, and I can take on a5 and say, oh no, my rook, and if takes, it would be stalemate. So h5 is potentially setting up some stalemate tricks, but I think he was very aware of that. He takes on b4. After I take on a5, he takes on f4. So now it's a situation where it's 3 pawns against 1, but it still takes technique for white. I play king g5, he plays rook b4. I play rook a1, he plays king g2, rook b1, b3, king f5, rook b5 check, king f4. And again, I'm dreaming of like stalemating ideas, like if I don't have this pawn here, actually if I take the pawn and rook off the board when he's not looking, then it would be stalemate. Who did that in New York? There's some viral video. I think it was Dina Belankaya who was like playing a street hustler and just removed all her pieces from the board until it was stalemate.
I'm coming to see you, girl.
No!
Yeah.
No!
Yeah. You ain't got nothing right there. Woo, baby. What's going on now, girl?
Let's see.
I finally beat you from Russia because
sure
you
beat
wasn't
me?
paying attention.
It's stalemate, sir.
But yeah, that would not fly in a FIDE classical tournament. So anyway, my opponent played b4. I played h4, rook h5. And this was a very accurate move because now if I take the pawn, then takes and I lose my rook. And there's no stalemate tricks. So after rook h5, I play h3. But the problem here is after rook h3, I'm still not able to take the b pawn, and now it's 3 pawns against no pawns, and my hope was beginning to fade. And I think I'll just zoom through the next few moves, or next many moves, because we'll see white's very accurate technique. He was gradually making progress on the king side, and yeah, my only hope was that he would play a move like b6, and then in the event of this move, I would play this, let's say check here, and now it's an awkward situation for white because if he waits, then I have this move, and this would be a draw actually, because I get rid of the b pawn and takes, it's a nice stalemate with a king on f5. The problem was that he never even gave me this opportunity to set up the trick. He started with f5, and white still gradually makes progress. Only so much my rook and king can do. And then eventually he just gives me the f5 pawn and then gives me the f4 pawn. But all white needs is one strong pass pawn to win the game. And this is actually an example of the Lucena position when it's rook and 1 versus rook, and the defending side is basically cut off. My king has no way to get to the same file as a pawn. So this is a theoretically winning endgame, and my opponent had flawless technique. Yeah, it was not too difficult to win because my king is so far away, and all white needed to do was ensure the king can come to the c file, and there's no way to stop the pawn from queening. So it was a very tough game. 85 moves, ended up losing what was a very long fight. I don't know exactly where I went wrong in this game. Maybe going all the way back, I should not have allowed this pawn c4 move, but I don't know. And I don't really have much time to analyze because the next round starts in 54 minutes. So I do appreciate if you made it this far. I really hope for those watching, you learned a thing or two. In some sense, these recaps are therapeutic for me. It allows me to just reflect on what just happened and try and move on to the next game. So thanks again for watching. I'll be back soon. Stay tuned for more recaps on YouTube and another live stream on Twitch, except probably by the time I will post this video, the tournament will be over. But just follow on Twitch and YouTube anyway, and I'll see you guys soon.